the lane. 15-10. Touchdown, Chargers.
What's up, guys? Welcome into a mid-July edition of Chargers Weekly. As always, joined by Matt Money Smith. Counting down the days till we get to see you guys at Jack Hammett Sports Complex. Less than 2 weeks, Money. I'm looking forward to it, man.
Most definitely. Very excited. We said it last week, and we're a week closer. So July 26th, day one, that's a Wednesday. July 29th is the back together again celebration on Saturday. Of course, we get the joint practices. Be an awful lot of fun with Derek Carr back out there. New Orleans Saints. The Saints fans always come out. It's kind of been a bit of a, well, I guess the last couple years it's shifted a little bit with the Cowboys and the 49ers, but always good to have the Saints back out there. Maybe Drew Brees come back up, hang out. Maybe we can get Phillip Rivers to hop a plane and come back out and redo the quarterback competition those two guys used to have when the joint practices.
It's going to be weird seeing Derek Carr actually at a training camp practice, no? I mean, this was a fierce rival for several years.
Yeah, I think Joey and Derek in a joint practice should be quite entertaining. And I'm sure he'll have some sort of what he believes is deep thought about the prior rivalry and how he's moved on, and he looks back fondly upon those engagements with the Chargers and something stupid like that. So I'm looking forward to that.
You're already transcribing the press conference as it happened.
See it a mile away.
After practice.
Every time we come down to L.A. with his dumb accent, I have no idea where he got it from. Just so many Raider fans down here. They always walk around town. You see them. They just tell you how much it means to them. It just means so much to me to mean so much to them. And that's what this is all about. Shut up.
That's what it's all about. Hey, you know what?
He's already doing it in New Orleans too. He's already. That's the people are like, oh, he lives rent free in your head. No, he doesn't. I just enjoy it. It brings me joy to see the stupidity of his quotes as he tries to assess the state of fandom surrounding the team for which he plays.
Well, we're gonna do the podcast live. What if we got him to sit down with us?
Well, the last time he did an interview with us on Petros and Money, he got really upset. I felt bad because the agent called Tim Cates and kind of got after Cates, our producer, a little bit. Because I asked him about throwing the ball away on fourth down. I was like, I got to ask you, you've thrown the ball away on fourth down twice. How does that happen? And he got really upset. I don't remember the plays you're talking about. I was like, well, I do. I can go through them if you want. And he got really pissed. So, yeah, I'm happy to have him sit down. I have no problem with it whatsoever.
We'll see if we can arrange it.
I'll make it uncomfortable for you, Chris. I'll make it real uncomfortable for you. I enjoy it. There's nothing I like better.
You know what would be great is if you're literally get your notepad out alongside Popper and Miller and Lindsay and you're just documenting each incompletion, and then we have a little chat afterwards about it.
100%. Let's go through these. Walk me through throwing the ball away on fourth down. You got a 4th and goal, and you throw it into the dirt. Kind of walk me through that process. Of course, meanwhile, I would take a snap and just immediately throw the ball into the ground and run the opposite way for fear of death. What was coming my direction when those guys are coming at me.
Well, hey, the Derek Carr conversation is a nice segue into the division, and that's what we're going to dig in today on. It's for Chargers fans. You're not going to like some of these stats, but I think if you look at the silver lining of what's happened over the last few years with Justin Herbert, especially Justin Herbert versus Patrick Mahomes, I think they're a little bit closer to the Chiefs than you may realize. The Chiefs, obviously, we'll really dive into them, but Money, it's the other teams in the division I want to start with, the Broncos and the Raiders. Since the Chargers haven't won the division in 13 seasons. They haven't won the division since 2009. So I looked at just their records against both the Broncos and the Raiders over that time. They're 13-13 against the Raiders. They're 10-16 against the Broncos. They're 9-17 against the Chiefs. We'll get into that later. But the Raiders and Broncos teams, they've had better teams too in seasons where they've kind of stubbed their toe in Denver or in Vegas, or the Raiders coming to Los Angeles. And that's the kind of the first step. And if you ever want to win this division, yes, the Chiefs, but you can't stub your toe against teams you're better than. And it starts week 4 against the Raiders in your place. And I guess we can begin with the Raiders, what they did last year with Josh McDaniels in his first year, what they've brought on. Obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo in, Derek Carr out. They brought in Jacoby Myers. They got another edge rusher to put on the other side of Max Crosby. I still think they're the 4th best team in the division as we see it here today. But the Chargers and Raiders, like I said, 13-13 is probably what you expect over the last 13 seasons.
You said it best. Stub their toe. They're better teams. They've been the better team in the matchups with the Raiders and the Broncos. Now, granted, the Broncos defense was an absolute juggernaut last year, and I think it proved that's why those games were so boring and why so many people complained about watching the Broncos in primetime over and over again, because their defense was so good to shut down the opponent, and their offense was so bad that they didn't score any points either. So it just became this very, not strange, but just this tight game that had very little points because their offense was inept, but their defense was exceptional. So it's understandable the split with the Broncos because the defense has been that good. When it was Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, and you think about the no-fly zone that was still sort of there for a little bit with that back end and how good it was and how good they've been. And look, this is an exercise in observing how teams choose to construct themselves through the draft. The Broncos have repeatedly invested in their secondary, repeatedly invested in their defensive line. So it's understandable that it's going to be a really good unit. And, of course, they've hit the jackpot on a couple of those later-round picks. You know, just the pairing of Jackson and Simmons has been the best safety duo in the league for probably the last 5 years. So when you've got all that, it's understandable you're going to be in tight games. And then it comes down to who's going to execute in the final 7.5 minutes of the fourth quarter and get out of here with a victory. And even you just go back to last year, you think about that win at SoFi, and it was a pretty gnarly game. The Chargers were down 16-13 in that fourth quarter, had to get that game-tying field goal, and of course we know it was a back-and-forth affair in overtime until you had the great rookie play from Dean Leonard and Joshua Taylor to get the turnover in the Dustin Hopkins field goal to get the win. But like if we're starting, are we starting with the Broncos or are we starting with the Raiders? We're starting with the Raiders. Sorry.
Start with the Raiders.
So I've gone down that whole thing. So just put a pin in that. I don't even know how I got there. My great apologies. But with the Raiders, the one thing that stood out to me looking at the games last year, and I don't want to go too far back just because it's a new coaching regime.
Of course.
It's new players. You got a new quarterback. You know what I mean? So if we just look at last year, the Chargers couldn't run the ball. And that was the case in a lot of the games. But you go to each of these games against the Raiders, in the one they won where they were up 10 going into the fourth quarter, like Austin Eckler ran 14 times for 36 yards. As a team, they ran 31 times for 76 yards. And like that's how you go up 14, and you find yourself in a bit of a tight game in the fourth quarter because you can't run the ball. And then, Chris, you go to the second one, and it's the same thing. The Chargers could not run the ball. It's Austin Eckler, 10 carries for 35 yards, and as a team, 22 for 72, while the Raiders go 29 for 154. Josh Jacobs goes crazy for 144 and a tug, and they lose 27-20. Like, against the Raiders, they got to be able to run the ball. That's what has to happen.
Well, I go to that game in Vegas. They started it with a pick six for Bryce Callahan. So they scored on defense to start the game. They couldn't stop Josh Jacobs. They couldn't stop Devontae Adams. I think there was a flea flicker in that game. He had 2 touchdowns, one for 45 yards, the other one for 31 yards. And, the offense couldn't score, period. Like, Keenan Allen scored in the fourth quarter. So, these are the games that I see, and I'm like, man, this team is so freaking talented. You can't lose those games. You can't lose, if we're kind of going to build, like, the path to winning the AFC West, especially this year against this Raiders team. Well, we should kind of look forward a little bit because Jimmy Garoppolo is now the quarterback. I think his health has been in question. There's been some talk about his foot and if he's going to be ready. I mean, they don't really have much of a backup option. They got a rookie and they got Brian Hoyer. So they're really putting all the chips in the middle of the table for Jimmy Garoppolo. No Darren Waller this year. You bring in Michael Mayer, who we talked about during the draft. We like a lot.
But he ain't Darren Waller.
Yeah, he ain't Darren Waller.
So that's a win because now you can cut Derwin loose.
Yeah.
Before, Derwin would treat Darren Waller a lot like Travis Kelce, where it was hey, let's eliminate this problem. Let's put Derwin on Darren and eliminate that, and then let's figure the rest out. That was sort of Brandon Staley's approach, and it would work. Darren Waller did not have very good games when Derwin was out there. Remember, Darren Waller wasn't out there last year, and then we saw Derwin on Devontae Adams a little bit in that week one, and so when you don't have to worry about that, that's going to be a big win for the Chargers defense and being able to use Derwin all over the place now as opposed to just locking up, for the most part, Waller. It's week 4, you mentioned it, so I think Josh Jacobs should be back by then, but it sounds like he is not going to play. That's kind of what at least his camp is intimating right now, is he does not want to play on the franchise tag, that it appears as though the Raiders are not interested in him long-term as they continue their roster turnover with this new regime. And I don't blame him. I mean, look, it's $10 million. It's kind of hard to walk away from that, but because he hasn't signed it yet,
does he get traded?
Does
he get traded?
I don't know if it would be a very unique situation. You're not trading to pay a guy $10 million for 1 year of service because you're probably not signing him long term either, for what he's looking for. So it's just one of those. Is there a team that feels like they're a running back away and they've got some cap space, so they'll give him $10 million? But I don't see that. So that's what's good. I don't know what to make of this Raider team. I liked their draft. Obviously, we love Max Crosby. We know what he does every time the Chargers face him. I mean, he is a wrecking machine. And be nice to have Rashawn Slater back out there to help with that issue. But I don't quite know, as I'm looking at you bring in Jacoby Myers, but you get rid of Darren Waller. It's just Hunter Renfro's still a great third down receiver. They did nothing on the offensive line. Like I said, I like Michael Mayer. I love Tyree Wilson. The idea of him opposite Max Crosby could be a real headache. He's a hell of a pass rusher, even though he went to Texas Tech where they don't believe in defense. But that's, I like those moves. They didn't. That's the other thing, Chris, you think back to the first game and how dominant they were against what's a pretty leaky offensive line, not a great offensive line. And then you go to that game they lost in Las Vegas, and they didn't get anything going. They couldn't. Now, there was no Joey Bosa, but still, Khalil Mack had 3 sacks in that first game. And then you go to that second game, and there's no sacks. Derek Carr throws for 250. You mentioned the flea flicker, a couple touchdowns. Now he threw the pick 6 to Callahan. So there's hurries and there's hits and stuff like that. And we know Derek Carr gets all flustered in the pocket and starts acting crazy when there's pressure. But at the same time, it was just that game was very strange. And it goes back to that Week 18 game 2 years ago and just how strange that game was, that they just couldn't. Because in that game, I'm looking at the box score right now, Herbert throws for 335 yards and a touchdown, but he gets sacked 5 times. It was really hard to connect sort of why it was such a disjointed, strange game that they ended up losing. And remember, after that, I remember walking out of Las Vegas going, man, that might be the one. That might be the game that prevents them from making the playoffs. They dropped to 6-6. That was a rough one. So you're right. The way these teams are, particularly the Raiders, look as though they are continuing to kind of recycle, and I don't know what they are. That's a team they need to sweep this year. That's a team they need to sweep in the division.
Justin got beat up that game, man. You're right. He was sacked 5 times. I remember after that game talking to some of the guys, and I know that I think it may have been Joshua Kelly specifically who said, we got to take better care of our quarterback. We got to take better care of our quarterback. And
right.
You mentioned Rashawn Slater. Joey Bosa and Rashawn Slater were not in that football game. Those guys make a big difference. The Raiders, to me, they just hang around. And again, this is a part of being in a division, right? The worst teams in a division see you twice a year. They know your tendencies. They know what you're all about. those games are typically pretty close. But if the Chargers want to get over the hump, right, week 4, it starts there because 4 of your last 5 games are AFC West games. So you almost have like a 10 or 11 game like season to prepare for winning the division. But week 4 it comes pretty early after some pretty tough tests early against Miami and Tennessee and Minnesota. But I think it'd be good. Get that Kellen Moore offense rolling a little bit in those first 3 games, and then see the Vegas Raiders week 4 and hopefully take care of business.
Yeah, they're worth 2. They're worth 2, and I knew it. Sorry, I was distracted and looking at my computer. You were talking about taking better care of Herbert. In that game, there was no Trey Pipkins, so you had Foster Sarrell at the tackle, and you're talking about 6 pressures, 4 hurries, a hit, and a sack that he allowed. Sawyer obviously had to contend with Max Crosby, so he's got 5 pressures, 3 hurries, a hit, and a sack. Matt Filer, who we talked about it, just a rough year all around. I was watching some rushing. I was actually doing quite a bit of film over the course of the week, and man, I'll tell you, the slide from Matt Filer from 2 years ago to last year was pretty dramatic. And you just watch that side, and there's we say it. There's a reason why you can't run the ball. It's not just because Austin Eckler or Joshua Kelly can't run. I mean, they were just guys. They were turnstiles. They were in the backfield like it was nothing. And you watch the Jacksonville game, the second half of the Jacksonville game, and every single time they tried to run the ball, there's just nothing doing. Didn't matter if they had 7 guys at the line of scrimmage or 4. They were just in the backfield immediately, shutting that thing down. But just kind of to your point about the division games, they're worth 2. They're worth 2. Those, because the easiest way to punch your ticket to the tournament is to win the division. So, and that's your number 1 tiebreaker. If you end up with the same record as the Chiefs and you split with them in the regular season, well, then the next thing that comes up is what's your record in the division. So, better sweep. If you can sweep both the Raiders and the Broncos, that then gives you that tiebreaker over the Chiefs. And that's something to think about if you're able to split with them and it comes down to both of you being 11-6 or 10-7 or 12-5, whatever it may be.
The one thing about the Raiders I'll say is, the games aren't played on paper. I would say on paper right now, I would probably peg them as the 4th team in the AFC West. Yeah. But they pack a pass rush. They pack a pass rush. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Chandler Jones came alive that game against the Chargers. And he was pretty quiet for a majority of the year, but he came alive certainly against the Chargers. You had Wilson.
Against Foster Sarrell.
Yeah, I know. But still, just look at this trio of Wilson, Crosby, and Jones now. Did you watch any of that quarterback documentary yet on Netflix?
I haven't watched it yet, so I need to.
I watched the first episode last night, and Max Crosby was freaking all over Patrick Mahomes, and I think it was after a play. I think the whistle may have blew, and he punched Mahomes, and Mahomes was like, "Bro, that's too far. You went too far." And then the Chiefs were down 17-0. Mahomes scores a touchdown, gets in Crosby's face, and then Crosby just freaking beelines it at Mahomes. Bangs his helmet and says, "You woke up the wrong MFer. You woke up the wrong MFer." And he said 5 times in a row. I'm like, dude, that guy's scary, man. And
it's crazy out there,
man. I'll never forget that Week 18 game, man. He single-handedly wrecked the game and ruined the Chargers' chances to postseason.
Completely. He's in the conversation as the best pass rusher in the league. He's in that conversation. He is incredible. And that's why the development of Trey McKitty as a blocking tight end, Donald Parham as a blocking tight end, is in his ability to block is going to be so important. Because if you feel good about putting Slater on that island and the Raiders just decide, Patrick Graham, who we know what he was able to do with that Giants defense, when he's coming over and trying to do some things now with extra weapons, with Chandler Jones, who had a bad year last year but came alive in that second game against the Chargers, now with Tyree Wilson, you're going to have tight end help on that other side, with Trey. So if you can do that, now you can double Max if he wants to be on that side, and if he's on the side with Rashawn, well, now you've got 2 of the best at what they do just going at it, and you're probably going to see each of them win their fair share of those battles. That's how you got to neutralize it. You can make. I don't think there's any question you can make a case when you look at each of the offensive lines that the Chargers have the best offensive line in the division. Yeah. I think I'd feel comfortable saying that. I know the interior of the Chiefs with Trey and Creed Humphrey has been really good, but I think you talk about a left tackle, and not that I ever thought that highly of Orlando Brown, and my gosh, Joey would eat his lunch every time they played each other. But remember, they're going to have to go with Donovan Smith now, who's like 60 at left tackle. So, with but when you talk about that Smith, Tooney, Humphrey interior, it's a really good interior line. So you got to take advantage of those tackles. Not a big Jawan Taylor guy. So that's, what we're going to be looking at against the Chiefs. And now I'm just swerving all over the place. We were talking about the Raiders.
No, before, just to put a pin in the Raiders, Jerry Tillery's still there. DeAndre Carter has made his way to Vegas and is going to be doing the same thing he was doing for the Chargers. Last question, given your affinity for Derek Carr, do you see Jimmy Garoppolo as an upgrade? Clearly, Josh McDaniels didn't think Derek Carr could run his offense the way he wanted it. He knows Jimmy Garoppolo. You can say whatever you want about Jimmy G. I know he's injury prone, but been to a couple NFC championships and had a lead in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl.
I think everything that we had heard from people in Las Vegas and Oakland is just something that Josh McDaniels decided he didn't want to live with anymore. And that's the mistakes, late game execution, inability to stand in the pocket long enough to let plays develop and deliver the ball downfield. He was a lot better with that 2 years ago. He kind of had taken a bit of a step and then regressed last year. So I think there's just frustrating things about Carr. He's a good quarterback. He's a good quarterback. He's an accurate quarterback. He throws a nice ball. He's got decent arm strength. He's got good mobility. I think it's the thing about Derek is you can't point to the stats. You have to watch the games to see when these plays appear over and over again in the red zone, interceptions in the red zone, just missing receivers in the red zone when the field shrinks and pressure is on you a little bit quicker, late game mistakes, the fumbles when you're fleeing the pocket way too early. I think it's things like that frustrated John Gruden, and you heard about how he was constantly looking for another quarterback, which is funny that he's in New Orleans trying to, coach him up now.
I know.
That's an interesting one. But so I think eliminating that, you probably take a step back in skill level with Garoppolo, but perhaps you just feel better about eliminating all of those things that were frustrating in one-score losses, in games that you had the lead in the fourth quarter and ended up losing. I think that just finally caught up to Derek Carr and his relationship with Josh McDaniels, and they chose to go with Garoppolo. So I don't think, is he better, is he worse? He's just different. I think they're comparable in how you feel about them quarterbacking your team, and they're just different.
The Josh Jacobs situation is certainly one to monitor because he was the best running back in football last year, and if they don't have him at the beginning of the year, especially, or if,
right,
Jimmy G's not healthy, I mean, that's a completely different looking offense.
Yeah. So they don't have a lot of depth. It's a team that does not have a lot of depth. Their secondary is still a huge issue, and their offensive line is still a huge issue, and those are two very, very important position groups when it comes to winning football games. So I think you're right saying, on paper, looks like they're the fourth best team in the division, and you'd hope the Chargers can sweep that 2-game series week 4 and week 15 on Thursday night.
So let's move to the Broncos, and you talked about them a little bit at the beginning. Week 14 and week 17 this year. They're not going to see Sean Payton's group until late in the year, so we'll know exactly
what they are.
Right? We'll know exactly who they are. The Broncos, I think they got better simply because of their head coach. Their defensive coordinator is new, Vance Joseph. We saw Vance Joseph with the Cardinals last year where the Chargers beat them late in that game. You mentioned it. Their defense is really, really good. I thought Russell Wilson maybe had his best game of the season against the Chargers in week 18. It was a weird game for the Chargers. They were in. The defense was playing pretty well going into that game, but you know what? I almost give the team a mulligan there because of the just weird situation when you have a playoff spot locked in and, guys are coming in and out. But their offense is going to be better, Money. It'll be better. To what extent? How much better? Is it going to be incrementally better? Or is it going to be leaps and bounds better? We'll see what kind of magic Sean Payton can work, coupled with how easy Russell Wilson is going to make it on Sean Payton in terms of doing what he wants Russell to do. They have weapons up and down. Javonte Williams at the running back position coming back from an ACL injury. You hear rumors about them maybe in the mix for Dalvin Cook if Williams isn't quite ready for week 1. They upgraded their offensive line led by Mike McGlinchey. So this is going to be a decent team, and I think the Chargers are going to have to be ready for those matchups because I think they're both going to mean something late in December and January.
Yeah, like I said, we'll know what they are by then. We know the defense is dominant. It's all. I mean, even though they traded Bradley Chubb, they still have. We didn't see Randy Gregory last year. He was injured or out for most of the season, so he's coming back. I like Zach Allen a lot. I thought he was one of the more underrated edge players out there just because he was kind of performing in anonymity out there in Arizona. So, and the secondary, it's Pat Surtain, how good he is cannot be put into words. He's a shadow.
Don't tell Devontae Adams that.
Right? It's crazy yesterday how good he is.
I saw the quote. He said, he's just not ready yet. He's not ready yet.
Yeah.
But he is. Yeah, sure. He's ready. Maybe not for Devontae.
Yeah, he's fine. And then that safety tandem, we talked about it, Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons. It's the best safety tandem in football. So now you're dealing with that. You've got a lockdown corner. You've got, Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons on the back end. And you've got a decent pass rush up front. Their linebackers leave you, wanting a little bit. Josie Jewell and Baron Browning played pretty well against the Chargers, seems like, every time they tangle. But you're right. It's going to come. There's a reason why they hired Sean Payton. There's a reason why they let go of Vic Fangio. They had the most dominant defense in the league year in and year out, or at least in the conversation as such, and they decided to let him go because the offense just could not catch up. And now they bring in a guy who's considered one of the better and brightest offensive minds of the last 20 years in the NFL to fix an offense that's got a lot of talent. Russell Wilson looked like he was carrying about 10, 15 pounds too much last year, and it looks like he shed that extra weight. We know how dangerous he is when he's running around, and he just really didn't do that last year until week 18 when he played the Chargers, and now all of a sudden Russell's running around, and you're like, yeah, this is what we remember. This is what took him to 2 Super Bowls and won 1. Like, we remember this now. This makes sense. So we know the pass catchers are good. They're first-round picks or high second-round picks. They've kind of got that basketball team of big body outside receiver Sutton, technical route runner Jerry Jeudy, and super quick KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick. Like, you kind of got everything in there. So and we saw Dulcich. He had a huge game against the Chargers that second game.
Good.
He's going to be good. So yeah, Javon. And by the way, when you don't play him until week 14, yeah, well, guess what? Javonte Williams is going to be healthy by then, and he is a hammer. An absolute hammer. So this is a really, really good team. I will not be surprised in the least to see them bounce back and make a run. And I think that's something to remember. All the people that we're talking about, the juggernaut that was the AFC West last year, certainly didn't turn out that way. But remember why you said that and what it was that led you to that idea. That's the Broncos this year. They're still that team. They are still that team, and they got one of the best coaches in the league now.
They didn't have a first-round pick, but they did get Marvin Mims. You mentioned all those playmakers. Add him to the mix now, too.
Yeah.
You got Mims. So basically Mims and Patrick, basically new guys.
They probably don't even want to see him. You got Patrick, Hamler, Sutton, Jeudy. I mean, how about that for a top 4?
It's crazy.
Yeah, and again, I won't be surprised if they want to run the hell out of the ball. If he's like, you know what, it really worked pretty well for Pete up in Seattle. They won a lot of games and won a Super Bowl. And Broncos have a a Marshawn Lynch type back that does not go down on first contact and gets stronger as the game goes on and can really be a weapon in the fourth quarter, I would not be surprised if, like you said, Chris, they go after Dalvin Cook and they really try to build this thing around the run and play action and take your shots here and there. It's not on your shoulders, Russell Wilson. We don't care how much money you're making. Let's just go win games, and you make plays when you have to.
I think last year, too, was an example of just how important structure is within an organization. We weren't in the building, but by all indications, Russell was kind of running everything, right? He had his own office, and it was, he's the CEO of the offense, essentially, and that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That's why Sean Payton's going to come in, and I think just by that, it's just that one simple subtraction of Nathaniel Hackett to Sean Payton is going to make this team a professional outfit again, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, I think. So the Chargers
comes down to players, and they got players.
Yeah, they got guys. That leads us to the Chiefs' money. I want to rattle off a few of these stats. Patrick Mahomes is 27-3 against the AFC West. He's never lost a road game in the AFC West. The only teams that have, I think they lost to the Raiders, and then they lost to the Chargers twice. Barely.
One Patrick that they Mahomes, conceded.
Yeah. Patrick Mahomes is rarefied air right now. The one thing that Chargers fans should look forward to is the fact that Justin Herbert has had a fourth quarter lead in every single game against Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
They haven't finished. That's not all on Herbert. That's on the team. That's on the defense. But they have been in every single game that they've played against Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert. Third and fourth quarter scoring is going to be, I think, the biggest thing in terms of just getting over the hump with the Chiefs, especially in that fourth quarter, because we've seen it way too many times where the Chiefs have something in the fourth quarter for the Chargers. Chargers don't have enough gas. We talked a lot about Kellen Moore last week, and I just looked at the third quarter and fourth quarter scoring of the Cowboys versus the Chargers. Again, personnel, Dallas is different, but Kellen was calling the plays. Fourth quarter scoring last year, Dallas was number 3 in the NFL, 7.7. The Chargers, 25, 5.1. Third quarter scoring, Dallas, number 5 in the NFL, 6.1 points per game. The Chargers, 29th, 2.9 points per game. Only Tampa, Denver last year, who we just talked about, and Pittsburgh were worse. So, again, just the addition of Kellen Moore, you hope, is enough to at least put the Chargers in the conversation to win the AFC West for the first time since 2009. It's going to take a Herculean effort to dethrone the Chiefs. I realize that. I think they've won the division 7 straight seasons. But they've been so close, man. And if they're healthy, and if they have an offense that can sustain points in the second half of games, and a defense that can get a stop, maybe we're talking about Chargers winning the AFC West for the first time in 13 seasons.
Well, like we said, this goes back a couple weeks when we talked about Brandon Staley's defense when we had Lindsey and Jeff Miller on. And we talked about how you go into these games and you feel like Staley's got a really good game plan in the first half. And you think about that week 2 matchup in Kansas City with all the interceptions, again, that should have been interceptions, and the ability to maybe go up big, and they just weren't able to cash those in. But then I look at the game at SoFi that really could have changed things. The Chargers win that. They improved to 6-4. The Chiefs slipped to 7-3. Now you've split the season series, and you're back in this mix. Instead, they start the second half up 20-13. They had to settle for a field goal, remember, at the end of the half and they were knocking on the door. It was like a 3rd and 1, and they couldn't punch it in from the goal from again, it was like the 2 or something like that. They had to kick the field goal, which, again, that goes back to what happened to the aggressive mentality. It's the Chiefs. You got to score touchdowns, not field goal. Anyway, so they're up 20-13. Start of the second half, they punt. The Chiefs get a field goal. Second possession, 3 and out. They punt. Chiefs get a touchdown, and now all of a sudden you're down 23-20. And the next possession they fumble. And it's just that's how you lose games to the Chiefs. You cannot make mistakes. You just can't. And last year felt like the year looking at it, you're like, all right, look at this defense. They've got all these young guys. They've reset their secondary. They're playing rookies at corner and safety, and Jalen Watson and Trent McDuffie are out there, and this is the time to go get them. And they weren't able to cash that in. Now, those guys are a year older. They're Super Bowl champions. They've certainly got a ton of confidence. They've been able to reset on these cheaper contracts. And we know, like you said, you've got to close out. The defense has got to come up big. It's hard. It's hard to do that against someone who's going to be in the conversation as the greatest quarterback in the history of this game. It is very hard. So when he extends those plays, man, things get tough. So, and it's interesting. I went back and looked at the advanced metrics and the quarterback hurries and the win rate. Like Joey Bosa's win rate in the 2 games against the Chiefs, it's like 35%. I mean, he just ate Orlando Brown's lunch in those games. And then you'll see, when he had 3 pressures and 3 quarterback hits, and then you go look at the pressures and the hits, and it's like, yeah, he's there, he hit him. But Mahomes is throwing a dump-off pass to Travis Kelce because he had that extra second for those guys to just get on that same wavelength and break your heart. And I can't even imagine what it's like as a defender to feel like, man, I am busting this guy up, and I'm running in place, and they're scoring 30 points. And we got, as a team, 12 hurries, 8 quarterback hits, 2 sacks, and they're putting up 30. And that's the Chiefs is the one where you said it. Kellen Moore, who was able to devise different game plans week in and week out with the Cowboys, depending on his opponent, did a really good job of, this week we're leaning on Zeke and Tony Pollard. Next week we're leaning on CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. Like, that's where he's going to make his bones. What's your game plan for the Chiefs? Can you not start the second half, punt, fumble, and go from leading by 7 to trailing by 3?
Money, December 16th, 2021. This is the game that I really thought that this conversation would be in the rear view and the Chargers would actually win the division. They had already beaten the Chiefs earlier in the year in Arrowhead. SoFi Stadium, Thursday Night Football. They're up at the half. They lose in overtime 34-28. Had they won that game, they would have had the season sweep over the Kansas City Chiefs. The records would have been tied. And the Chargers had games against the Houston Texans, the Broncos, who were not good that year, and then that Raiders game. It was a COVID year. It was all wacky. We know what happened in Houston that following week. But I almost feel like the deflation of that loss had some carryover as well. The Chargers were this close to winning the AFC West in 2021. I don't know if people fully realize it. They would have had the season sweep over the Chiefs. After a Thursday Night Football game, they would have had extra rest, tons of motivation to go to Houston despite having a bunch of guys out with COVID, and finishing the season as AFC West champions. The closest they got was 2018 when Anthony Lynn was the head coach. They were 12-4, and the Chiefs
lost
had the tiebreaker over them. But just think about that. Brandon Staley's first year, they were this close. They were this close to winning the division. They play well, and they always play the Chiefs well. Well is not good enough, right?
Right.
Close is not good enough. But Justin Herbert in year 4, a healthy roster. I don't put it out of the realm of possibilities. I'll put it that way. The Chiefs have dominated a division like nobody's business right now. You look around the entire NFL, there's nobody close in terms of domination. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. When you don't lose road games in the division, you're dominating. You're doing things that nobody's ever done in the NFL. That's what the Chargers are up against each and every year. But they're so freaking close, man. Like that's why I think you have to be encouraged by how Justin Herbert has played against Patrick Mahomes and how the Chiefs and Chargers have played really over the last several years, even dating back to Phillip Rivers. Every game comes down to the wire. The Chargers have just not been on the right end.
Well, I'm hopeful. I know a lot of people pointed to the Week 18 game against the Chiefs and how that's when you want it. It's a bonus because the Chiefs wrap up the division seemingly every year by Week 15 or something. So you get a break, and maybe that's just a win because Mahomes isn't going to play. I hope that's not the case.
Yeah.
I hope that's for the division. That's what the NFL is hoping, that's your Sunday night football game in prime time or the Saturday night game in prime time that everyone's going to tune into, and it's going to be for the division. Week 7's it. October 22nd, they catch a break. Every single season, it feels like the Chargers have been sent to Kansas City on a short week or in prime time and dealing with one of the most hostile environments that's now magnified because it's a primetime game or it's a late game and people have been getting all lubed up in that parking lot, which is probably the best tailgate in all of the NFL. And it's just it's a cauldron of anger and vitriol that you have to try to navigate along with playing the most dominant team in football the last 5 years. So I'm happy that it's just a standard Sunday afternoon game, October 22nd at Arrowhead. We have not had one of those, it feels like, in a long time against the Chiefs.
But, Money, the only problem with that is that it is a short week because they play Monday Night Football against the Cowboys.
Right.
So, but it's standard, but again, you still the littlest of breaks the Chargers can't catch against the Chiefs.
It's true. No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. It's a shorter week. However, the one thing that I'm hopeful is that J.C. Jackson is who we think he is. And he's healthy and he's found his rhythm because now when you have three corners, however they want to divvy it up, wherever they may go with Asante and Mikey Davis and J.C. Jackson, if you can just get that extra beat, let's turn those hits and hurries into sacks because it's not open. Because Patrick Mahomes can't find that extra guy because you've got three viable, legitimate, potentially Pro Bowl cornerbacks out there that are able to give your defensive front, Morgan Fox and Joey and Khalil, that split second that they need to turn hits to sacks. Look, they got to him, man. In week 2, they were all over him in that first quarter. Like I said, there were interceptions. There should have been interceptions. There were BS penalties that nullified interceptions. And they had it. Staley had the game plan laid out. The players executed it. And they deserved a better fate than they had. Rush into the line on a 1st and goal from the 3 was just, and it drove me crazy all last season, the hurry up. I could chart all of the hurry, if I had the time to go through it, I could chart all the hurry-up plays that Joe Lombardi tried to run, and I would put their success rate somewhere around 1%. And that was the worst of the bunch. Hurrying to a 1st and goal from the 3 and throwing a pick 6 in that Week 2 game and completely flipping that game on its head after you had dominated completely up until that point. So it sounds like a lot of, peeing and moaning and what ifs. But I think it's because they are so close, and it's just so hard to get over that hump, especially when it's such a small hump, it feels like, the way these two teams play each other.
Yeah. Chargers fans have lived it, They know all about this rivalry. They know all about the heydays of Rivers and LT and when they were winning the AFC West, and it seems like it's long overdue for that to come back around. Maybe 2023 is that year. So
you'd hope so.
We'll be at camp in a couple of weeks. Next week we will dive into training camp, preview everything you need to know, position battles, guys to watch, as we get ready for another season of Chargers football. And then, Money, we'll be at Jack Hammett. Hopefully we can get some players to sit down with us like we did last year. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. Every week. Let's do it.
Yep. Let's do it. All right. For Money, I'm Chris. This has been Chargers Weekly. Thanks for listening.